Imagine waking up tomorrow, getting your coffee, getting ready for work, and then realizing that keeping your job, keeping your social circle, and essentially just keeping a roof over your head, all of that requires you to publicly pledge your absolute loyalty to the local mayor.
Right, and not just a casual pledge either.
Exactly. I don't just mean voting for them in a booth. I mean, you have to attend this weekly dinner where you offer a literal sacrifice to an image of them.
Yeah, it's wild to think about.
And if you refuse, well, you don't just lose your paycheck. You lose your entire professional network. Your friends literally stop talking to you.
You become a total social pariah overnight.
Yeah, you become a target for local harassment, and you might even be exiled from your own city.
That's a level of pressure most of us today cannot even begin to fathom. The entire structure of society is basically engineered to force your compliance.
And that life or death, really high-stakes scenario wasn't some hypothetical thought experiment. That was the exact everyday reality for the people who received what historians consider the very earliest surviving Christian document in existence.
Which is just incredible when you realize what's actually in it.
Right. We are looking at a letter written roughly around 49 to 51 CE. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because if you are joining us today, you're the kind of learner who wants to bypass the endless scroll of information overload and just, get right to the actual heart of the matter.
And we have some really fantastic source material for this deep dive.
We do. We are pulling from an incredible document, Chris Arvelas's survey of 1 Thessalonians. The first thing you really need to know is that this is not some dusty academic theological textbook written in an ivory tower somewhere.
No, not at all. It is an urgent, highly emotional letter.
Exactly. It's written to this vulnerable, newly formed community that is basically just trying to survive in a very hostile Roman world.
It's honestly a survival guide as much as it is a theological text. So in this deep dive, we are going to explore this bustling, high-pressure city called Thessalonica. We will look at the radical social and economic shift these early believers had to make.
Which was huge, by the way.
Massive. And we'll get into Paul's intensely personal leadership style as he tried to guide them through it, plus the everyday ethics of sex and labor they wrestled with.
Because they still had to, go to work every day.
Right. And ultimately, we'll see how this newly minted community dealt with profound grief while expecting the world to end at literally any moment.
And for you listening right now, I really want you to think about how this actually connects to your own modern life.
Because it definitely does.
It really does. Honestly, how do you handle anxiety? How do you process the loss of a loved one? How do you navigate the crushing pressure of a society that fundamentally disagrees with your deepest values?
We tend to think of these as uniquely modern problems, don't we?
We do, but this ancient letter offers a surprising, heavily tested blueprint for all of it. But this is key. We cannot understand the blueprint without understanding the ground it was built on.
The context is everything here.
Right. So what was Thessalonica actually like? What were the actual mechanics of living there?
Well, to understand the sheer weight of what these people were up against, we really have to look at the political and civic machinery of Thessalonica.
To set the scene for us.
So this city was a massive commercial center. It was a major Macedonian port founded way back around 316 BCE by Cassander.
Okay.
And it was sitting right at the head of the Thermaic Gulf. But what made it an absolute powerhouse of the ancient Mediterranean was its location. It sat directly on the Via Egnatia.
Well, the Via Egnatia, I've seen maps of this. It's not just some dirt path, right? It's basically the ancient equivalent of an 8-lane interstate highway linking the Adriatic Sea all the way to Byzantium.
That is a perfect way to picture it, actually. It was this massive transit and communication hub paved with heavy stone. Imagine the constant noise, the clatter of iron-rimmed chariot wheels, thousands of merchants shouting in a dozen different languages, soldiers marching by.
Carts loaded with goods everywhere.
Exactly, grain and luxury goods. It was relentless. And by the time our letter was written in the Roman period, Thessalonica wasn't some backwater village.
Far from it.
Rome had made it a capital city in Macedonia way back in 146 BCE. But the real game changer happened around 42 BCE.
What happened then?
The city made a highly calculated political move. They aligned themselves with Octavian and Antony after the Battle of Philippi.
Picking the winning side.
Exactly. Because they backed the winning horse, Rome granted them the really coveted status of a free city.
Wait, what does free city actually mean in a functional sense, though? Does it mean they didn't have to pay taxes, or did they just get to run their own local elections?
It mostly meant they had autonomy over their internal affairs. They could mint their own coins, which is a big deal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they governed themselves with their own civic magistrates. They were called politarchs, and essentially operated without a Roman military governor breathing down their necks on a daily basis.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
It was, but, and this is the crucial catch, that freedom was entirely contingent on their absolute, unwavering loyalty to Rome. It was a very conditional freedom.
Ah, so they had to constantly prove they were Rome's biggest fans, or the empire would just swoop in and strip all those privileges away.
Precisely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that proving loyalty wasn't just a political act like voting. It was deeply, deeply religious.
Right, religion and politics weren't separate back then.
Not at all. In Thessalonica, the archaeology shows widespread Greco-Roman cults. But more importantly, the imperial cult was everywhere.
So worshiping the emperor.
Yes, the emperor was treated as a literal divine figure. To be a good citizen, to maintain the city's free status, you had to participate in the festivals, the sacrifices, the public honors dedicated to the emperor and the traditional gods.
So living there is like living in a modern tech hub, crossed with a massive international shipping port.
That's a great analogy.
The wealth is everywhere, the opportunity is everywhere, but the catch is that your social standing, your business networking, and your patriotism are all inextricably linked to these religious festivals.
You couldn't opt out without huge consequences.
Right. If I'm an artisan, say, I don't know, a tent maker or a leather worker, how does this impact my daily life on a practical level?
Well, this brings us to the mechanics of Roman society. You have to remember, the state did not provide a safety net.
Right. No welfare.
Exactly. There were no government grants, no unemployment benefits, no public hospitals. Your survival depended entirely on the patronage system and trade guilds.
Okay, break down how a trade guild functioned, because I'm picturing a modern labor union.
It's somewhat similar, but with a major twist. If you were a leather worker, you belonged to the Leather Workers Guild. This guild provided your materials, secured your market stall, and even acted as a mutual burial society so you wouldn't be thrown in an unmarked grave.
Which was a big deal back then.
A huge deal. But these guilds held their meetings in the temples of the local patron gods.
There's the catch.
Yeah. Every guild meeting, every feast involved a sacrifice to that god or to the emperor. You couldn't do business without it.
It's not like a modern labor union where you just, pay your dues and go to a boring meeting in a fluorescent lit conference room.
Not even close.
You are actively participating in a religious ritual just to keep your license to sell goods.
Correct. And then there is the patronage system on top of that.
Oh, right. How did that work?
Well, every morning in a Roman city, there was a ritual called the salutatio. Poorer citizens, known as clients, would literally line up at the houses of wealthy patrons at dawn.
At dawn?
Yeah. They would greet the patron, offer their political support, their physical protection, and public praise. In return, the patron might give them a basket of food, some small coins, or legal protection.
It sounds like a total web of dependency.
It absolutely was. If you stepped outside of this web, if you refused to honor the patron's gods or the guild's gods, you didn't just lose your religion.
You lost your food.
You lost your food, your business, your friends. It was economic suicide.
Which makes the existence of the document we are discussing completely mind-blowing. I mean, the P46 papyrus, right?
Yes, we absolutely have to mention that.
I know we have to bring up this archaeological marvel. It dates to around 200 CE, found in Egypt, and it is the earliest surviving collection of Paul's letters, including 1 Thessalonians.
It is just an incredible piece of physical history. The papyrus proves that despite the staggering social cost of leaving these pagan networks, a community did exactly that.
Yeah, they actually walked away.
And their foundational texts circulated across the ancient world with astonishing speed.
So knowing how dangerous it was to rebel against the city's culture, that it meant economic starvation and social exile, we really have to look at what these believers actually did.
Because it was shocking.
Truly. Chapter 1 of this letter outlines a radical, shocking pivot. The source material highlights a massive sociological shift. It says in chapter 1, verses 9 and 10, that these believers turned to God from idols.
And that one phrase is deeply revealing. It proves that this community was overwhelmingly Gentile.
Meaning non-Jewish.
Exactly. They were pagans drawn directly from the civic religious complex of Thessalonica. Now, if you read the account in the book of Acts, chapter 17, it describes Paul reasoning in the local Jewish synagogue and some Jews and God-fearing Greeks believing.
Right, that's the usual story.
But the heavy emphasis on turning from idols in this specific letter tells us that the bulk of this community was leaving behind the temples, the trade guild sacrifices, and the imperial cult.
Wait, what exactly is an idol in this context? Because I think a modern listener hears that and just pictures, a marble statue sitting on a shelf.
Yeah, that's the physical object.
But it sounds like turning from an idol meant turning away from the HR department, the neighborhood watch, and the local bank all at once.
That is exactly what it was. An idol wasn't just a piece of art, it was the focal point of the civic, economic, and social order.
Everything revolved around it.
Everything. When you stopped bringing a sacrifice to the Temple of Dionysus or the imperial shrine, your neighbors noticed immediately.
You couldn't hide it?
No, the guild leaders noticed. Your patron noticed. It was a very public withdrawal.
And the letter opens with this foundational triad defining their new identity: faith, love, and hope.
The famous triad.
Right. In Greek, it's pistis, agape, and elpis. It sounds so beautiful and poetic. But the source makes a very distinct point that these aren't just abstract, warm and fuzzy feelings for the Thessalonians.
Not at all. Paul qualifies every single one of those terms with an action word.
How so?
Well, in verse 3, he remembers their work of faith, their labor of love, and their steadfastness of hope.
So they're all tied to action.
Exactly. Faith pistis is not just mental agreement. It is trust in motion. It is active obedience. Love agape is not romantic sentiment. It's self-giving, costly, covenantal love expressed in concrete action.
And hope.
Hope elpis is a gritty, future-oriented endurance. So faith works, love labors, and hope endures.
I am just marveling at the anti-imperial implications of this endurance. I mean, in verse 10, it says they're waiting for his son from heaven.
Which is a direct challenge to the emperor.
Right. They're declaring Jesus as Lord, as the risen one who delivers from wrath. But hold on, if they are publicly dropping out of the local trade guilds, snubbing their patrons, and declaring a crucified Jewish man to be the true Lord of the world instead of Caesar, wouldn't they become immediate targets for retaliation?
They absolutely did. The text confirms they were experiencing intense public backlash.
It wasn't just silent disapproval.
No, chapter 1, verse 6 explicitly states that they received the word in much affliction. Their conversion was highly visible and highly offensive to the civic order.
Because it threatened the city's free status.
Exactly. It was a total transfer of allegiance.
It was so dramatic and disruptive that the news of what they did traveled down the Via Egnatia before Paul even had to say anything.
That's how loud their actions were.
Yeah, the text mentions that the story of their radical faith sounded forth everywhere.
It disrupted the social order so profoundly that the merchants and travelers on that 8-lane ancient highway were gossiping about it all over the Mediterranean.
You really can't quietly withdraw from the machinery of a free city.
No, you stick out like a sore thumb.
So if I'm a Thessalonian believer, I've just lost my job, my family thinks I'm crazy, and I'm facing public harassment.
You're in a bad spot.
In that kind of pressure cooker, human nature dictates that I am going to start questioning the guy who got me into this mess.
Of course you would.
My trust in Paul, the founder of this community, is going to be severely tested. Which naturally leads us to how Paul has to vigorously defend his character against the local rumor mill.
Right, and we have to remember the broader cultural context of the ancient Mediterranean here.
What were the neighbors saying?
The Thessalonians' pagan neighbors were likely mocking them, saying something along the lines of, "You've been conned. Your so-called leader took your money and bolted the second the local authorities got angry."
Because there was an actual industry of traveling philosophers and charlatans back then, wasn't there?
Yes, there really was. The Greco-Roman world was full of traveling rhetoricians, cynic philosophers, and, well, spiritual hucksters.
Like ancient grifters.
Exactly. They would enter a city, put on a dazzling display of public speaking, gather a wealthy following, collect patronage and funds, and then vanish to the next town.
Leaving everyone empty-handed.
Right. So Paul is writing this letter from Corinth alongside his co-senders Silas and Timothy, and he knows exactly what the Thessalonians are being told.
He knows the rumors.
Yes. So in chapter 2, he launches a vigorous defense to completely dismantle that narrative.
He explicitly denies using deceit, impurity, greed, or flattery. He reminds them that he didn't come seeking glory.
He's checking off all the boxes of what the hucksters do.
But what really strikes me is the language he uses. In a highly patriarchal, macho, Greco-Roman world, Paul compares himself to a nursing mother taking care of her own children.
It's very intimate language.
He says, "We were gentle among you." Then he flips it and uses paternal imagery, talking about exhorting and encouraging them like a father with his children. He's using this deeply intimate, familial language.
What's fascinating here is how Paul actively redefines authority.
How so?
Well, in the Roman world, authority was about domination. It was about how many clients you had standing outside your door at dawn for the salutatio.
Right, power meant having people bow to you.
Exactly. Paul flips that entirely. His leadership is profoundly relational, sacrificial, and morally transparent.
He's serving them, not the other way around.
He is establishing that authority in the church exists entirely for the edification and care of the community, never for the personal status or enrichment of the leader.
And he backs it up with physical proof. He constantly emphasizes his manual labor. He talks about working night and day so he wouldn't be a financial burden to them.
This is a huge point.
I think we need to dwell on the physical exhaustion of that for a second. If Paul is a leather worker or a tent maker, we aren't talking about typing on a laptop in a coffee shop.
No, not at all.
We're talking about calloused hands, smelling like animal hides, hunched over a heavy loom, or cutting tough leather with crude tools for 12 to 14 hours a day, just to earn enough to eat a piece of bread, all while preaching this new message.
The physical toll would have been immense. And we have to remember, in the Greco-Roman world, manual labor was largely despised by the elite.
Really? It was looked down on.
Oh, absolutely. It was considered the work of slaves and the lower classes. A true philosopher would never lower himself to manual labor. He would rely on wealthy patrons.
Yeah, so by working, he's basically humiliating himself in the eyes of the culture.
Paul deliberately chooses the humiliation and exhaustion of manual labor to prove his motives are pure. He refuses to take their money. He works so hard that no one can ever accuse him of being a grifter.
He cares so much that he even sends Timothy, his younger co-worker, all the way back to Thessalonica just to check on them.
Which was a dangerous journey.
Yeah, he was terrified that the pressure had broken them. And when Timothy finally returns with good news, chapter 3 is basically this massive emotional sigh of relief.
You can really feel the tension leave his writing.
Paul is just overjoyed that they are standing firm.
Mm.
But, and we need to be careful here, in the middle of this loving defense, we have to navigate a very difficult and historically controversial part of the text.
Yes, we do.
I'm talking about chapter 2, verses 13 through 16, which contains some very sharp language regarding the Jews and wrath.
This is arguably the most debated paragraph in the entire letter. The source material explicitly guides us to handle this passage with extreme theological and historical care.
Because it's been used terribly in the past.
It has. It is critical to note that this text has unfortunately been misused in history to support anti-Jewish sentiments, which is a gross misreading of Paul's intent.
So how does the safest, most broadly accepted scholarship interpret what Paul is actually doing here?
The consensus is that Paul is speaking polemically about very specific local opponents in Judea and connecting them to a historical pattern of violent resistance to the prophets and the gospel.
So he's not talking about an entire race of people.
No, he is not making a blanket ethnic condemnation.
Huh?
Keep in mind, Paul himself is Jewish.
Right, that's a crucial point.
He is addressing the immediate, visceral reality of the violent opposition that both he and the Thessalonian believers were facing. It's a localized, historically situated grievance, not a universal racial doctrine.
That context is incredibly helpful. Okay, so having cleared the air, reestablished his credibility, and expressed his sheer relief that they were surviving, Paul pivots the letter.
He moves from the past to the present.
Exactly. He moves from defending his past actions to instructing them on how to actually survive the present. This brings us to what the source calls the embodied ethic.
It's all about how they live in their physical bodies.
Right. It's all about sex, love, and day jobs. And he introduces this massive concept in chapter 4 called hagiasmos.
Hagiasmos. That translates to sanctification or holiness.
Okay.
For Paul, the absolute will of God for this community is moral separation unto him. And the very first practical boots-on-the-ground application of this holiness that he tackles is sexual ethics, or porneia.
He calls them to a strict standard of sexual holiness. Now, I have to assume this contrasted unbelievably sharply with the broader Roman pagan environment.
Night and day difference.
What were the sexual norms of a Roman city like Thessalonica actually like?
Well, to the Romans, sexuality, particularly for men of status, had very few moral boundaries as long as social hierarchies were respected.
It was all about power.
Completely. A wealthy Roman male could pursue sexual relations with slaves, prostitutes, or concubines without any social stigma whatsoever.
Wow.
The only real taboo was violating the marriage of another high-status citizen. Morality was entirely based on power dynamics and social rank, not on a mutual covenant.
So when Paul tells these new believers to control their own bodies in holiness and honor, not in the passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God, he is introducing a totally alien concept.
It was revolutionary.
He is introducing covenantal fidelity. He is telling them that their bodies are actually sacred, regardless of their social class.
Exactly. He is democratizing sexual ethics. He is saying that the lowest slave and the wealthiest merchant are bound by the exact same standard of bodily holiness.
That would have been shocking to hear.
And alongside this sexual holiness, he emphasizes a second crucial ethic, Philadelphia, which means brotherly love.
Why is brotherly love so critical in this specific moment? I mean, is it just about being nice to each other at church on Sunday?
It goes much, much deeper than that. This is where the sociology of the city comes roaring back into view.
Oh, right. The guilds.
Remember those trade guilds and patronage networks we discussed? When these believers turned from idols, they lost that safety net.
We lost everything.
They lost their emergency funds, their business connections, and their burial societies. Paul is instructing them to create a completely new family structure to replace what they lost.
So this Philadelphia is survival.
Yes. This Philadelphia is a family-shaped, economic, and social communal care. They have to literally become a new society for one another.
And part of that care, part of surviving as this new society involves their daily work.
Right, they still have to eat.
Paul tells them to live quietly. The Greek term is hysikasin, and to work with your hands, ergazistai tes chersin.
Beautifully pronounced.
Thank you. I try. So what does this all mean? I have to observe a massive irony here. The core of their faith is that the world as they know it is ending, and Jesus is returning from heaven at any minute.
That's their driving hope.
Yet Paul's big apostolic advice to them is essentially, mind your business, keep your head down, and go to work.
It seems contradictory at first glance.
Wait, why not just quit their jobs, pool whatever money they have left, and wait on a hilltop for the sky to crack open? I mean, if the world is ending, why bother clocking in?
This raises an important question about the reality of living in a world without a state welfare system.
Right.
A healthy church had to become a new kind of association, one that was mutually supportive and entirely non-parasitic.
Oh, I see.
If these believers quit their jobs to just sit and wait for the end of the world, what happens when their savings run out?
They would become a massive burden on the rest of the community.
Precisely. Or worse, they would have to go begging for food from the very pagan neighbors who are already mocking them.
That would be humiliating.
Being a public burden, becoming a nuisance to the civic order, would absolutely destroy their credibility and their witness.
So going to work is part of their witness.
Yes. Paul is establishing a profound theological principle here. Eschatology, your belief about the end times, does not excuse you from your daily responsibilities. It actually frames them.
So you don't just sit around.
Right. A serious Christian life isn't compartmentalized. Your holiness reaches into your work habits, your daily grind, and your quiet diligence just as much as it reaches into your theology.
That makes perfect sense. Work becomes an act of quiet rebellion against the chaos. But that intense waiting, that eschatological expectation, creates a massive emotional crisis for them.
It really does.
Which brings us to the emotional climax of the letter. What happens when the believers who are faithfully working, faithfully waiting, and enduring the persecution? Well, what happens when they start dying before Jesus actually returns?
This is the pastoral heart of the letter, found in chapter 4, verses 13 through 18. The Thessalonian community was dealing with profound, uninformed grief.
They're scared.
They were genuinely terrified that the dead in Christ, their friends and family members who had passed away, had somehow missed out on the promised kingdom.
Because in their minds, the whole point was to survive until the parousia.
Exactly.
The parousia is the technical term for the coming or presence of Christ. They thought, if you die before the finish line, you lose your prize. The terror of that must have been suffocating.
It was. And you have to remember, the afterlife in ancient Greco-Roman thought was generally a gloomy, shadowy, hopeless existence in the underworld.
There wasn't much to look forward to.
No. The Thessalonians feared their loved ones had slipped away into that void and lost their place in the eschatological victory forever.
So Paul steps in to actively correct this and comfort them. He uses a beautiful euphemism for death. He calls it sleep.
The Greek word is koimao.
And then he explains the actual mechanics of the parousia to put their minds at ease. He lays out a specific sequence of events.
He tells them that the Lord will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God.
Okay, very dramatic.
And then he reveals the crucial detail. The dead in Christ will rise first.
Hold on, so the dead actually get preferential treatment. They get front row seats to the event.
That's exactly what he's saying.
That completely flips the Thessalonians' anxiety upside down. They thought the dead missed the parade, but Paul is saying they are leading it.
That is the exact pastoral genius of this passage. Only after the dead are raised are the living believers caught up, and the Greek word for caught up is harpazo.
Harpazo. I want to dig into that word. That doesn't sound like a gentle floating up into the clouds. It sounds visceral.
It is a strong, forceful word. It implies a sudden, violent snatching away.
Like being grabbed.
Exactly. It's the same root word used for a wolf snatching a sheep or someone being rescued from a fire. It conveys an overwhelming, irresistible divine force pulling them out of their present reality to meet the Lord in the air.
In the phrase to meet, the word apantesis has a really specific cultural context that brings this all together, doesn't it?
It does. If we connect this to the bigger picture of the Roman world, epantesis is a highly technical civic term.
How was it used?
It denotes a city's citizens going out to welcome a visiting emperor, a magistrate, or a highly honored dignitary.
So if Caesar is coming to visit Thessalonica, the citizens don't just sit in their living rooms waiting for him to knock on the door. What do?
They would leave the city walls, go out onto the Via Egnatia to meet him on the road, form a massive celebratory procession, and formally escort him back into the city as their honored ruler.
Oh, wow.
Paul is deliberately using this well-known, highly political civic imagery to describe the ultimate welcoming of the true Lord.
That is brilliant.
The believers are the citizens going out to meet the returning king, to escort him as he establishes his reign.
That is deeply, profoundly comforting. This isn't a textbook theology lesson. This is ancient grief counseling.
That's a great way to put it.
Paul isn't denying their pain. He's not tossing off a cliche like, don't be sad, they're in a better place. He is disciplining their grief with concrete resurrection hope.
He is giving them a functional mechanism for how their loved ones are saved.
Right.
And we absolutely must note how this text has been used and, frankly, misused in modern times.
Oh, people love to make charts out of this.
They do. People often mine these specific verses to create speculative timetables, complex millennial charts, and intricate theories trying to predict the exact mechanics of the end times.
But that's missing the point.
Entirely. The source material makes it unequivocally clear. The text's primary purpose is mutual consolation. Paul concludes the section by saying, "Therefore encourage one another with these words."
It's about comfort, not predicting the future.
It is about resurrection, reunion, and comfort. It is not an invitation to date setting.
Having settled their agonizing anxiety about the dead, Paul then turns to the timeline for the living in chapter 5.
He introduces the concept of the day of the Lord.
Right. And he uses a very striking metaphor. He says the return of the Lord will be sudden, like a thief in the night.
The imagery of the thief in the night emphasizes total unexpectedness. It happens when people are asleep, when they think their doors are locked and their property is safe.
No one schedules a robbery.
Exactly. And Paul specifically contrasts this sudden arrival with the phrase peace and security.
Peace and security. That wasn't just a generic phrase, was it? That sounds like a political slogan.
It was the ultimate political slogan of the Roman Empire. The Pax Romana, the Roman pace.
Ah, I've heard of that.
The empire promised absolute safety, order, and prosperity to anyone who submitted to its rule. It was plastered on coins, spoken in speeches, and enforced by the Roman legions.
So it's like living in a modern city where the government constantly broadcasts crime is at an all-time low, everything is perfect, on every digital billboard, but the locals know the reality is a powder keg.
That's a very accurate comparison.
Paul is warning them that while the world is echoing that imperial propaganda, boasting about how safe they are, sudden destruction will come upon them.
But the believers are called to a totally different posture. Because they are not of the darkness, that day will not surprise them like a thief.
What are they supposed to do?
Paul calls them to be sober-minded. The Greek word is nepho, and to stay awake. They are children of the light. The return of the Lord will be a terror for the unprepared, for those trusting in the empire's false peace. But it is not a terror for those who belong to Christ.
Because they already know what's coming.
Exactly. Verses 9 and 10 of chapter 5 are central to their soteriology, their understanding of salvation. Paul explicitly states that believers are appointed for salvation, not for wrath.
And because they are so deeply secure in that ultimate salvation, Paul outlines how their community should function while they wait.
He gives them a rapid-fire checklist for community order.
Yeah, he tells them to respect those who labor among them as leaders, to admonish the disorderly, to encourage the faint-hearted, and to support the weak.
It's very practical advice.
But here's where it gets really interesting to me. It's the final ethical commands he lays out. He commands them to rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, and test everything.
It's a high bar.
Think about that. They are persecuted, economically disenfranchised, grieving, and waiting for the world to end. Yet, the ultimate Christian posture he demands isn't panic.
No, it isn't.
It isn't cowering in a bunker. It is joy, constant prayer, discernment, and profound gratitude.
This ties back beautifully to what theologians call the already not yet tension of Pauline theology.
Can you break that down?
Sure. The believers are already claimed by Christ. They already have the presence of the Holy Spirit. In fact, pneumatology, the theology of the Spirit, is woven throughout the entire letter.
So.
The gospel came to them in the Holy Spirit, and their ongoing sanctification is explicitly empowered by the Spirit. So moral transformation is happening right now, in the present.
They aren't just waiting around.
Right. It allows them to live as an ordered, loving ecclesia, a covenant assembly, yet they still wait for the consummation. They wait for the ultimate physical return of Jesus. They live in the tension between the already and the not yet.
That tension is the defining characteristic of the Christian life.
It really is.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's synthesize all of this.
Sounds good.
We've seen that conversion, as described in this ancient document, is a total costly transfer of lordship. It's moving from the civic idols of the city to the living God at great personal expense.
And we've seen that authentic leadership requires extreme moral transparency, sacrificial love, and calloused hands.
We've learned that everyday tasks like doing manual labor quietly and maintaining covenantal sexual ethics are deeply spiritual acts of resistance.
They are part of the witness.
And perhaps most beautifully, we've seen that hope in the future should produce peace, diligent work, and joy today, not anxiety or speculative panic.
And that deeply integrated vision is exactly why this 2,000-year-old letter remains so incredibly relevant today. It absolutely refuses to separate abstract doctrine from daily practical discipleship.
So for you listening right now, I want to ask you directly, how does this integrated vision of faith, work, and hope challenge the way you compartmentalize your own modern life?
It's a tough question.
It is. Do you keep your spiritual beliefs safely tucked away in one box, your 9-to-5 work habits in another, and your anxieties about the future of the world in yet another? Because for the Thessalonians dodging the Roman authorities and caring for their grieving friends, it was all one unified, gritty, beautiful life.
And I would like to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over, derived directly from the historical context of our source material today.
What's that?
Consider the fact that this letter is our very earliest surviving glimpse into Christian writing. When Christianity left behind its first written footprint in human history, it didn't leave a list of abstract philosophical doctrines.
It didn't leave a political manifesto on how to overthrow the government.
No. Its first footprint was a pastoral letter written by a friend to comfort grieving, frightened people trying to survive in a hostile city. How does knowing that the very foundation of Christian literature is rooted in trauma, comfort, and deep friendship change what we view as the true core of this movement?
Usually when we look at history, we expect that clean, precise line in a textbook. But finding out it's actually messy, real, and full of profound human comfort, well, that's where the real deep dive begins.